Hi 641, I'm here to talk about my North American history annotated syllabus. Um, this isn't my basic format. I hope you guys can see that okay. I basically did it like my English ones. So the first thing that pertains to the content is our course description. I'll read that real quick. Surveys North American history from pre-contact to 1865, emphasizes early Americans, institutions, revolutions, and reform. Topics will include encounters, American Revolution, and the founding of the United States, slavery, democracy, and the Civil War. I chose this college level course. I believe I approached it in a chronological approach because with everything that happens, it seems to flow a little easier. And I think going from event to event will help the students transition well. And I also think they will be able to analyze the major events and figures, so it's kind of a more political approach to history. Learning objectives, the students will gain an understanding of North American history from pre-contact to 1865. Through a chronological approach, students will be able to link and analyze the causes and effects of historical events. They'll be asked to choose and analyze an event in an analytical research paper, which I'll get to later. Their understanding will also be evaluated in class discussions, quizzes, and exams. So pretty basic for a survey class. They will also, I think, gain some critical thinking skills by analyzing these events. So I think that explains my learning objectives. And my learning objectives are basically the same for both courses. But for part one, with the readings, I chose volume 1 of Foner. I really liked it when we read it. I've read some other works of his, and I think he does a great job explaining events and putting them together for our students. So I picked that one as the main text of the course. And then I chose a few that I will supplement that with for different topics. So I chose McPherson's Battle Cry of Freedom for the Civil War era, Wilderness and Politics, and Indian Gifts by Wilbur Jacobs. I'm nervous if you guys can't tell. And Michael Wittgen's An Infinity of Nations, How the Native New World Shaped Early North America. So I thought those would help explain each topic in more detail for the students, and I might pick a couple chapters from that because I wouldn't want to be too overbearing with the readings, but still get them a good understanding. Coursework, I mentioned a little bit before. I wanted to have them do discussions. In previous classes, I've done different things with in-class discussions. I've had them fill out sheets where they check their knowledge before they can leave. They have to participate at least 3 times to gain points. Quizzes are 10-point quizzes. There's probably 10 of those to equal 100 points. Exams, I decided to do a midterm exam and a final exam just to monitor their understanding. And then there is the larger analytical research paper where they will choose a historical figure or event or even just a certain topic, I have them gain approval of the topic from me by the end of the first week, and then they have the entire semester to work on it with different checkpoints throughout. So I think that's a reasonable amount of work for that. And then to get into the actual course schedule, Unit 1, I go through the contact with the Americas, Columbus, settling of English colonies, and English expansion. I thought those things all worked well together to get us started. And then I kind of explain more detail about the Native Americans, because I think we need a good background on the Native Americans if we're going to talk about them as much as we do. So then we move into the other settlements, because a lot of times the other settlers get pushed aside for the English. So I wanted to throw some Spanish and French and Dutch in there. And then we go on to colonial America, which brings us into the origins of slavery and then the beginning of the Revolution, with Continental Congress and Declaration of Independence. And then after the midterm, we kind of go through American identity and kind of talk about how the economy developed. And then to specify with the economy, we bring in slavery and how it impacted the South and its economy. And then I move on to the crusade against slavery. And then that all builds up into the Civil War. And then we focus on the Civil War for the remaining units and weeks, where we talk about Lincoln and the Republicans, and we talk about the Emancipation Proclamation, the Confederate States saving the Union, different battles, and then kind of bringing the war to an end. A little bit of reconstruction, but not too much, because that's for the second part, and kind of Lincoln's legacy that he left behind. So since this is a survey course, there are a lot of topics to talk about. That's why I liked the paper, because then they can explore something that might strike them as interesting, and they can look into that further. My second part of the survey basically has the same course description and learning objectives, except they're running from 1865 to 2008. And we're going to emphasize some social and cultural topics, some political topics, and the economic aspects of U.S. history. Some of the topics include Reconstruction, industrialization, World War I, the Great Depression, New Deal, World War II, Cold War, the 60s, and then we go into globalization and terror. Same kind of chronological, but maybe a little more thematic, because I tried to group things in more of a political topic. So maybe they go thematic, but each theme goes chronologically, if that makes sense. So the learning objectives are the same. I want them to understand how these events impacted history, and be able to interpret these events. The course readings, we go with Foner, the same one that we did volume 2 and 3, because I think this book will guide the students and lead them through the history, give them different aspects or perspectives, and then, let me think. And then we're going to go with Reconstruction after the war, John Hope Franklin. This has more of an analytical approach to Reconstruction. So we would start off with some of that. Again, I might not make them read the whole book, just maybe a few chapters. And then for World War I included, and I don't know how to say his name, Robert Zeiger, I hope that's right, American's Great War, World War I, and the American Experience. So I feel like World War I sometimes is drowned out by World War II. So I wanted to emphasize that a little more. And then we're going to do Hard Times and Oral History of the Great Depression. I thought this would be a good idea because that way my students can engage with regular people and what they went through during the Great Depression. So the coursework is basically the same, the discussions, the quizzes, exams, analytical research papers, or paper, rather. And then I'll run you guys through our schedule. I start off with Reconstruction, learning about the 14th and 15th Amendments, the aftermath of slavery, kind of recap the Civil War. And then I move into the Industrial Revolution and labor movements, which includes the railroad, different technological advances, and kind of the politics of those things. And then I move to the West, where we talk a little bit about farming and expansion and those types of things. And then I kind of move into more of a civil rights mode, where we talk about segregation, progressivism, civil liberties. That takes up about 2 weeks. And then World War I, where I talk about where we wanted to be neutral, and then I talk about how we got into the war, and then the effects of World War I at home. And that brings us into the Great Depression and the 1920s. And then the Great Depression leads us into New Deal, because sometimes I think New Deal may not be emphasized because we run right into World War II. But then I do run into World War II, start off with Pearl Harbor, and then I do a week on the war front, because I think that's important to give them some key battles and an understanding of where these things were taking place, and then kind of the effects of it on the home front. So what happened with our economy, those types of things. And then I move into the Cold War, anti-communist movement, and then we switch right into the 60s with the Kennedys, civil rights, Vietnam, all of those good things. And then I kind of go into the rise of conservatism with a Nixon and Reagan explanation, and then kind of into the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s with globalization and terror. So on this, one of the sensitive topics obviously will be 9/11. This year I worked with some of my English students who they're college freshmen, so they aren't really that familiar with what happened on 9/11, so I think teaching about that is important. But I didn't go into a lot of detail in terms of the Obama administration because I think it's too soon to look at those things. But I did go through the election. So I think that gets them a good idea of, where we were as a country and how we came to elect him. So I think that is a good stopping point for that, because then they can move on and remember the administration the way they want to. And then, as you guys kind of saw, this is more thematic with the chronology within it. So I hope you guys like it. I'm excited to see everybody else's works. Bye.